The domain just means which numbers we can possibly plug in for x. And typically there's no restriction. So in most cases, oh, let me fix that. The domain is going to be every possible number there is. So everything from negative infinity all the way up to positive infinity. So any number you can think of, any decimal, any fraction, any whole number, anything will work for x, and you can plug it in. So this is the typical domain. And usually if it's different than this, they'll tell you what the domain would be, like only numbers bigger than 0. But usually this is the typical domain. But there are some things you have to look out for. You can never divide by 0, and you also can't have a negative number underneath the square root. Now there's no square roots in this problem, but there is a division. So 4x is divided by x plus 14. So this is what we're assuming by default. But if we plug in, let me make sure I get that right, if we plug in a negative 14 into this problem, we would have negative 14 on top times 4, but then negative 14 plus 14 gives us division by 0, which is not allowed. So what we're going to do is say, well, every number works except 14. So we still start all the way at negative infinity, and we go all the way up to negative 14. We use the open parentheses, which means we don't include this in number here. And then again, open parentheses, we're not including this in number here, and going all the way up to positive infinity. So really, we just broke this up right at the number negative 14, and that symbolizes, when you read this, you can see that negative 14 is not included in this range. It's not part of the domain. This one's very similar. Finding the domain, there's no square roots to worry about. The only thing is a division. You can't divide by 0, so we need everything from negative infinity to positive infinity, but cut out the negative 5, because negative 5 plus 5 gives you 0. And this is how you would write that the negative 5 is not included. One more here, the only thing that would make 0 on the bottom would be the number 0. 0 times 7 would make 0 down here. And you can't divide when there's a 0 on the bottom. So again, negative infinity to positive infinity, cut the 0 out. Again, 0 would make the bottom a 0, so we cut 0 out. This one's a little more complicated. You have to solve this 5y squared minus 80. When will that be equal to 0? So when is 5 squared minus 80 equal to 0? You can solve it either using the quadratic formula. Here I solved it by factoring, divided everything by 5, and then I could factor this difference of 2 squares to y minus 4y plus 4 equals 0. When would this side equal 0? Well, if you plugged in a positive 4 or if you plugged in a negative 4. So those are the two numbers that aren't going to work, because those two numbers make the bottom equal to 0. So we need to again write everything from negative infinity to positive infinity, but put a gap at negative 4 and then another gap at positive 4, because those numbers need to be left out. And this one's going to be very similar. You solve and you're going to see that negative 2 and positive 2 need to be left out. And this is asking the same question just in a different way. The domain is everything except negative 3 and 10. Those numbers cannot be used. That's why they're not in the domain. And I think that's all the ones over domain.